Hello, Good News TV viewers. Thank you so much for tuning into our YouTube channel and watching one of our videos. Before the program starts, we have just a couple really quick things we'd like to ask you to do. First of all, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to be notified when we release a new video. Next, be sure to click on the share button below if you'd like to share this video with your friends on social media. And finally, type any comments you have about this program in the comments section below. We hope you enjoy this Good News TV production. God bless you.
The following program discusses sensitive issues related to addictive behavior. Parents are cautioned that some material may be too candid for younger children.
Well, today we're going to be talking about an important topic, sex, brain chemistry, and mental health. And as I mentioned earlier, in our field of depression and anxiety recovery, this is a major player in regards to emotional discord and even marital discord, as well as the problems that can occur with infidelity, etc. We'll talk first about a chemical called phenylethylamine. Phenylethylamine is the love chemical, and it's a chemical that speeds up the flow of information between nerve cells. Professor Robert Fryer of Ferris State University in Michigan explains falling in love involves phenylethylamine, which causes a person to be less likely to be aware of the faults of the other person. PEA gives us that euphoric high, that feel good, everything is wonderful. This person can do no wrong. We've oftentimes seen people who fall in love with somebody and ask, "Are you blind?" Well, yes, they really are blind. And almost no one can tell them at that stage of the game because phenylethylamine is pouring out in large quantities. And this is why we also recommend that love be based on principle. There has to be principled aspects. This love is not just chemistry. And if we just boil it down to chemistry, we're going to see what happens to this, but we are going to be set up for the typical stages of marriage that occur that aren't necessarily very pretty as the years go by. And this is also very important to educate our young people in these things, and this is why at Weimar Institute our students learn things like this about brain chemistry, and they can have that perspective so they don't just think it's somehow counsel from the Bible and spirit of prophecy that has no bearing in life today, but it actually makes perfect sense in regards to what we know about science today. Who wouldn't get a rush with these chemicals running around, however? This also explains why many people, quotes, need to be in love. They are addicted to that rush of chemicals. And this is why we see people, in high school and college, one after a breakup, it's bad, and then all of a sudden a new relationship starts, and they go from one relationship to another, and those sorts of things. This chemical high can last from a few months to around 4 years, but what's the average for PEA? 18 months. Pretty typical relationship lengths are about the time the passion starts to wind down after this high wears off. Studies are very clear that to be happily married, we actually first must be happily single. That means happily single before we're ever in any romantic relationship. And this is something that's actually been demonstrated let's see, I'm not sure I have that demonstration here. I may not have that study here, but if you're wanting to see that study, it's a large study, thousands of people and it shows their happiness before they tied the knot versus after they tied the knot, and 1 year later, it's precisely the same as it was before they ever started a romantic relationship. And so this is why it's very important for us to get emotionally healthy and stable before we ever consider romantic relationships as well. But if you were to go to, and at Weimar, we are starting a master's program that leads to clinical counseling. There's a shortage of good clinical counselors, a major shortage, and they're needed more than ever before. If mental illness is at an all-time high and things have to do with the thoughts, we have to have more appropriately trained mental health therapists. And so we are starting, in the process of starting a master's degree program. We already have a bachelor's degree program with a psychology emphasis there. But in order to get your license to be able to do this, we have to have that master's level there. And if you are looking at a typical textbook in regards to marriage, in fact, one of the licensed mental health therapists, there's different licensing pathways that you can go, but one of the licensing pathways is called a marriage and family therapist. And marriage and family therapists, in one of their major textbooks, and they look at the statistics and the bell-shaped curve, they actually teach, and this is what every marriage and family therapist knows, they teach the 4 stages of marriage. What do you think the first stage of marriage is called? The first stage of marriage is called the Euphoria Stage. And of course, that's when PEA is there. That's when your partner can do no wrong. Everything about them and all of what they do is just something that's very attractive to you. And this is just really exciting. What do you think the second stage of marriage is called? What did you say? Okay. He calls it shock and awe here in the front row. But in the marriage and family therapy side of things, it's called the Non-Euphoria Stage. This is when, you realize that you're married and that you do love your partner, but you realize there are some things that aren't so attractive about them now. And you realize, I never really saw that aspect of them before, and it kind of really irritates me, and this aspect and that aspect. But, you're still married and you're still, going along life's pathway together, and it's not that terrible, but you realize it's not quite the same as that honeymoon stage. Then you get to the third stage. What's the third stage called? All right. Some call it reality. In the typical marriage, and by the way, I say typical, this occurs in 95% of couples when you take a look at the studies. The third stage, and of course it might be variable, it may be 10 years before you get there, it might be 20 years before you get there. But the third stage is called the Despicable Stage. This is when you look across the room at your partner after they bawled you out on something, and actually feelings of hatred start to well up. And you start realizing there are things that you totally despise about this individual. And you're wondering, how did it get to this? How did I not see this earlier? And this is why half of marriages end in divorce. You take an oath at the time of marriage that's a very solemn oath. This is why it's good to have as many people at your wedding as you can possibly have, because you want to have a lot of people there recognizing the commitments that you've just made to each other. But what is that? What are those committing words saying? Until what? Until death do us part. But at this stage, you forget that you took that oath, and you think that actually what you swore to is, I will be married to this person until love shall last. And so it's very easy at this point to find reasons to exit the relationship. Irreconcilable differences is what the divorce courts state, and this is well describing people that are in the despicable stage. Now, some people actually realize, there is an oath that they took, and there would be complications. They're at least forward-looking enough to say, if I do this, it's not like my life goes to bliss again. There's going to be complications from this divorce. There'll be complications with the kids. There'll be complications with that. And so I think we need to go to counseling. And so in the counseling aspect of things, in the typical marriage and family therapist, where they will try to lead them is to the fourth stage of marriage. And the fourth stage of marriage is called the stage of toleration. This is where you actually, have certain boundaries, where you realize there are some good things about the partner, there are some good things they're bringing to the relationship, but then there are things that are not so good, but we're going to learn how to tolerate those frustrations. And this is what can help bring couples together who want to continue to last in their marriage relationship. And you will hear about this pretty frequently if you're ever fortunate enough to go to a 50th wedding anniversary celebration. Have any of you been to a 50th wedding anniversary celebration? Yeah, I'm sure some of you. Let's just see the hands. Let's see the hands of those of you who have been married for 50 years and been to your own celebration. Okay, we have a number of hands that are going up. And if it's a typical celebration, what will happen when all these people are there is they'll say, these two are heroes in how they put up with each other all these years. How in the world were you able to live with this man and all of this sort of things, and with the irritations of this woman, and it's honoring the ability of two people to tolerate frustrations that are often put in front and center on the commendation of these individuals who've made it for 50 years. But do you think that's God's ideal for a marriage? It was not God's ideal. God's ideal of the marriage was that it would stay in stage one. And one of the reasons, and in fact, as far as staying in stage one, I told you in stage 95% of marriages will go through these four stages if it lasts past the third stage. But there's 1% of marriages that will stay in the euphoria stage. And today, we're going to be talking, there's several factors, of course, that are important to be able to stay in that euphoria stage. But there is one factor in particular that we're going to center in on today. We're not going to center in on all of them. That would take, a whole week if we went through each one of those aspects of things. But since this one is not talked about virtually at all, and it's very misunderstood, we're going to talk about one of the main reasons why marital euphoria tends to wear off is a misunderstanding of sex and mental health. So let's go into some of the brain chemical aspects here. And interestingly, mammals have the same chemicals involved to a large degree since we're in the mammal kingdom, and so we can learn a lot from looking at mammalian sex. And what happens when you drop a male rat into a cage with a receptive female rat? Has everyone tried that? First, you see a frenzy of copulation. Then, progressively, the male tires of that particular female. Even if she wants more, he has had enough. However, replace the original female with a fresh one, and the male immediately revives and gallantly struggles to fertilize her. You can repeat this process with fresh females until he is completely wiped out. What is this called? It's called the Coolidge Effect. And it's the automatic response to what type of mates? Novel mates. Now, you can see there in the two curves here The 1 is the minutes to ejaculation when you see different colored mice. That's indicating different females. And then when you see the same female, you see this steep curve happening in regards to minutes to ejaculation. But this Coolidge effect is also what helps start the pornography pathway. The Coolidge effect also occurs not just in males, but in females. Studies show that when given the opportunity, human females are just as promiscuous as males. Even in the female rodent world, for example, the female rodents will flirt a lot more, arching and inviting displays with unfamiliar partners than with those which they've already copulated. In keeping this with this phenomena, when couples divorce because their sex lives have, quotes, gone out of sync, the formerly uninterested spouse is often startled by a raging libido when a new lover enters the picture. And they thought it was just a problem with their libido. That, I've got some sort of major problem with my libido, and then when there's this divorce and breakup and now there's a new lover and you get a little PEA thrown in, then all of a sudden they realize, whoa, I didn't realize that I was capable of having this libido. So what's going on? For you rats and all mammals, the desire and motivation to pursue sex arises from a neurochemical called dopamine. Dopamine amps up the centerpiece of the primitive part of the brain, the reward circuitry. It's where we experience cravings and pleasure and where we also get addicted. At the top of our human reward list that produce these dopamine surges are food, sex, love, friendship, and notice the fifth one. These are all things that the Lord put in our lower brain. This is here in the limbic system portion of the lower brain to produce this dopamine. It's novelty. Now, why do you think the Lord put novelty there? He put novelty because he wanted us to be able to get dopamine reward satisfaction from learning new things. He wanted us to always be lifelong learners. And if your dopamine pathways are functioning well, you actually will get nice dopamine levels as a result of learning new things that are solid and true. I know we had one woman, just an example, as you might imagine, in the people that come through our program with depression and anxiety, their dopamine levels tend to be quite low. Apathy tends to be primary. They get up and start the day not because they're interested in the day, but because of duty and responsibility. And they have lost interest in the normal things of life. This is where the dopamine problems result. But then occasionally, fortunately, we have maybe some who it's a different pathway that's involved in their depression. It's not a dopamine pathway. And I know we had one girl recently. She had gone through tremendous trauma. Her mother had been through our program a year earlier, but she sent her daughter. And you might imagine all the serious traumas that we might deal with, but this was serious trauma where she actually witnessed her father burning to death as a result of suicide. He poured gasoline on himself, and there was a big explosion in the home, and she was wondering what was going on, and she comes back watching him burn alive. Tremendous trauma in her life. And a lot of complications as a result of that. But it didn't affect the dopamine pathway, fortunately, because she wasn't doing some of these things that will affect the dopamine pathway. And she would sit on the front row with a big smile, and she'd say, every lecture there's an aha moment. This is just great. She was just getting dopamine highs with each one of these lectures, and just that alone would have caused a whole lot of benefit in her. Of course, she had to have the counseling in regards to the PTSD and that type of trauma. But the Lord wanted us to be able to learn new things, but he did not want us to be able to, or want us to learn new things in regards to the sex side of things, and that's why he put the exclusion there in the 10 Commandments and those sorts of things. And as we find out, those exclusions are there for our own good. So all of these 5 areas are called natural reinforcers in contrast to addictive chemicals. And the dopamine reward circuitry helps us not to forget about things during prolonged focus that would hinder our ability to accomplish the designer's will and could even compromise your ability to survive. In other words, if we didn't have those dopamine aspects, those dopamine rewards, we could get so busy doing something useful that we would forget to eat for weeks. Would that be healthy? No, it would not be healthy. And so this is why this lower brain aspects of things are around, so that we would remember that, we do need food. We would remember that we need this love and friendship and companionship and those sorts of things. And of course, the lower brain tells us we're hungry, but when we are hungry, if our frontal lobes are intact, we have a choice. We have a choice if we're going to eat then. We might be hungry and we might realize, a 2-meal-a-day plan I've just learned is better for me because I can go into ketosis and I can improve neuroplasticity, and I'm hungry in the evening, but I'm not going to eat. My frontal lobe is going to say no. And when you do that, after a week, you're not even hungry in the evening, and you can have some benefits and those sorts of things. But if you're hungry, you also have a choice when you're going to eat, what you're going to eat, where you're going to eat, how you're going to eat, and often who you're going to eat with. These are all frontal lobe choices that are there in regards to response to that dopamine need. And it turns out, in regards to dopamine, the bigger the squirt, the more you want something. No dopamine, and you just what? Completely ignore it. Chocolate cake and ice cream tends to bring about a big blast of dopamine. Celery, not so much. And it turns out sexual stimulation and orgasm are the biggest natural blast of dopamine available to your reward circuitry. One of dopamine's nicknames is called the molecule of addiction. And as psychologist Susan Weincheck explained, the neurotransmitter dopamine does not cause people to experience pleasure, but rather causes a what? A seeking behavior. Dopamine causes us to want, to desire, to seek out and search, she wrote. It's called the anticipator. It's the opioid system that causes one to actually feel the pleasure. Yet the dopamine system is stronger than the opioid system, she explained. We seek more than we are satisfied. And addiction may be thought of as wanting run amok. So what happens when we have repeated exposures to supernormal stimuli? Now, I used that term yesterday when we talked about technology. What was the supernormal stimulus? That was that phone, because it can grab our attention whenever it's part of our surroundings. And there are supernormal stimuli in regards to sexual activity. And it can be supernormal stimuli when we do it too frequently, as you'll find out, even if we're doing it in the natural way. Or it can also be supernormal stimuli if we're not doing it according to design. In other words, if you, I won't go into all of the details of this, but the term sodomy, doesn't include just one act, there's multiple acts. The term sodomy itself is actually supernormal stimuli. And so this is what is going to produce these 3 adverse brain type changes. These supernormal versions of natural rewards can override our brain satiation mechanisms, and the I'm done feeling goes away, creating unhealthy brain changes. This is why unhealthy food and unhealthy sex can be more addictive to more people than substances such as alcohol. And this has been well demonstrated in studies. As addictive as alcohol is, unhealthy food and unhealthy sex is even more addictive. Research confirms anticipation of reward and novelty amplify one another to increase excitement and actually rewire the limbic system in these areas. So what are the unhealthy brain changes of supernormal stimuli? The first is called desensitization. This is when the pleasure response gets numbed. And this is not something the Lord wanted us to experience in regards to our marital sexual relationships. He didn't want a numbed pleasure response. But desensitization, there are changes in the receptors in the brain. Dopamine and dopamine 2 receptors decline in the brain's reward circuitry, leaving the addict less sensitive to pleasure and hungry for dopamine-raising activities and substances of all kinds. More pleasure, thus what? Leads to what? Less pleasure. And the addict then tends to neglect interests, stimuli, and behaviors that were once of high personal relevance. Why is that the case? Because the dopamine receptors are going down in the brain. And so things that used to be very important and interesting to them no longer have that interest anymore. And they start to neglect stimuli and behaviors and interests that used to be important to them. What is the second change? Sensitization. This is where a super memory of pleasure resides in the lowest part of the limbic system called the amygdala. For those that are involved in brain anatomy, the amygdala actually curves down on this lower, and there's a bulb section where that amygdala memory is stored in regards to pleasure. And rewired nerve connections cause the reward circuitry to buzz in response to addiction-related cues or thoughts. This Pavlovian memory makes the addiction more compelling than other activities in the addict's life. And when this occurs, the individual is also more sensitive themselves, and they're more irritable with the usual nuisances of life. Now, you can tell individuals that are in this stage very easily if you're even working with them and if you work with them every day. I know prior to moving to Weimar, I was doing a lot of gastroenterology procedures. I still do them some, but I was basically in the full-time practice of medicine, so I was doing scopes every day, sometimes 17 different scopes a day, and we had a very efficient operation in the GI lab, and there was a couple of technicians that would be in the room in their 20s, younger women, and anything that would even tangentially be related to sex, all of a sudden their conversation would go towards sexual themes. That is a big clue that you're in this sensitization. Notice that first part. Nerve connections cause the reward circuitry to buzz in response to what? Addiction-related cues or thoughts. And so these individuals that kind of turn whatever conversation is into sexual things, it's a clear sign that they're in that condition. And it's kind of a sad condition to be in, as it was for these girls, because they would be very sensitive if their boss, told them that they had to stay an extra couple hours. I mean, the emotions would just be on display and all sorts of issues, and then they'd be saying all sorts of negative things, and the usual nuisances of life would just get them down. And it wasn't that way in their life prior to getting into this addiction aspect of things. And so this is why individuals' personalities can actually change. And notice what happens in this stage as well. You'll see it invariably. Anxiety goes up. The third stage is hypofrontality. This is where your willpower begins to erode. Alterations in frontal lobe gray matter and white matter correlate with reduced impulse control, weakened ability to foresee consequences. And so that means your overall comprehensive self-control goes down, but then you don't seem to recognize the problems of how your behaviors of today can produce all sorts of problems with it tomorrow. Dysfunctional stress circuits occur, so you have a lot more problems handling significantly stressful situations. And in this stage, your limbic system overrides your frontal lobe. So you have a frontal lobe, but that limbic system is really in control. And in this state, the individual is prone to relapse into a previous addiction in response to stress. So the emotional intelligence goes down. Remember, one of the aspects of emotional intelligence is managing your emotions. These people are managed by their emotions as a result of the hypofrontality occurring. So when we get to animal behavior, going back to that, after a rat has sex, he exhibits an initial cycle of measurable effects. The first part of the cycle lasts 96 hours. How long is that? How many days? That's 4 full days. And by the way, this is also true in human beings. During this time, the rat's sexual motivation, called libido, is nil to sluggish, and he's hyperreactive to a variety of drugs. After these 4 days, he's able to copulate again, but it will take him how long to return to maximum studliness? 15 days to return to maximum studliness. And in humans, it's about 14 days, right in that 14, 15-day realm to return to maximum studliness. Now, here's what the animal researchers are saying. This is a quote from top animal researchers in the area of sex in the world. The long-lasting sexual inhibition, and that was that 4-day period, resulting from copulation to satiation constitutes a protective mechanism against overstimulation of the brain circuits involved in its processing. So in other words, I know that's a little bit of scientific lingo there, but what is that saying? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing that there's long-lasting sexual inhibition. In other words, it's a good thing that libido is down during that 4-day period. Why is that? Because if they were to do it again, what would happen? They would get overstimulation, and the process of these 3 adverse brain changes would start to occur. So during the decreased libido stage, that's those 4 days, there's only one way a rat will have sex again. Furnish a what? A novel female. Among the resulting plastic changes scientists have already measured in the brains of sexually exhausted rats are reduced androgen receptors, higher estrogen receptors, increase in opioids that dampen libido. And so these are other major changes that occur as a result of this overstimulation. Now, in America and in the world today, often you'll have overstimulation even with the same partner. And as you'll see, it takes some time. This is where that 4-year period of the PEA occurs. It takes about 3.5 years of overdoing it because there's not an immediate response on these 3 adverse brain changes. It takes some time for all of this to accumulate and occur over time. But at that 3.5-year point, you will hear this many times in individuals. They'll say, you know, when I first got married, it didn't matter what she was wearing. But now she better have the right outfit on. And what is that right outfit? It has to be kind of a different provocative outfit. This is why Victoria's Secret makes all of this money, so that you fool the brain that a novel opportunity is presenting itself, and so you can actually then be able to get through those stages of the sexual experience. An endocrine cycle after sex is also present in humans. Researchers find a mysterious yet consistent spike of testosterone at day 7. We have a number of 7-day rhythms, but after a sexual experience, testosterone goes down, and it will stay down, and it will spike at 7 days. This is why I talked about yesterday how a lot of the low T levels are due to overdoing it. And if they would just quit doing it so frequently, those testosterone levels would come up, and then if you wait 2 weeks, the testosterone levels come up even more. Now, there are some benefits, of course, to sex in a marriage relationship. One of those is prolactin release. It's 4 times higher after the normal design act of sex compared to masturbation. And having sex with a loving spouse versus someone that's just friends with benefits, which is what are often called today, which isn't that loving spouse, you will get a nice oxytocin spike as well. The oxytocin is a bonding chemical, and this is why it's good in a marriage relationship to not be abstinent from sex. It actually is a good thing every week or 2, or studies show if you're going longer than a month, not so good because you're going to have some adverse changes take place in the bonding. Masturbation delivers, however, a weaker "you're done" message. And by the way, I'm just telling you today, masturbation is at an all-time high in society. It is amazing how it is encouraged by some who are not clear on the science in regards to this. and what it does. But as a result of delivering a weaker "you're done" message, there's a much greater likelihood that you're going to overdo it and get into that stimulation, these super stimulation, all of those adverse effects rather frequently. A few years ago, German researchers reported that as the duration of partnership increases, sexual desire generally declines in which gender? Women. While the desire for tenderness generally declines in which gender? Men. Usually the more frustrated partner of either gender logically assumes he or she would be perfectly happy if only he could have, or she, as much sex as he wants. But it turns out it's a bit trickier than that. Consider what happened when male monkeys were paired repeatedly with the same females who were always put in the mood thanks to daily hormone injections. These poor females were just loaded up with hormones so they'd be ready for sex whenever the male monkey wanted to have it. Monkey heaven, right? The answer was no. The males copulated less and less frequently and with declining enthusiasm over a what year period of time? 3.5-year period. Not only that, when novel females showed up, these slackers hurriedly rolled into action with their original zest. So, in other words, you're much more likely to stray, you're much more likely to be tempted by others if you're actually overdoing it in your marriage relationship. And this is something that a lot of couples are not clear on. They think, hey, if I don't give it to my man whenever he wants it, he might actually go somewhere else to get it. And the studies show, no, if you actually have it less frequently, and of course, as long as he's not masturbating or doing other things like that, that sort of thing, that you'll actually be able to preserve your union, and actually the straying will not be as likely to occur. Here's what the researchers say. The truth is that if your spouse isn't having orgasmic sex with you as often as you'd like, he or she could be what? Preserving your union by preventing you from satiating yourself sexually too frequently. Couples engaging in too frequent orgasmic sex eventually drift into engaging in conscious affection only when pursuing orgasm. This is another major flag as far as a key if you have been overdoing it. And I can tell you, I practiced 25 years in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Anyone want to guess what the #1 vehicle driven in Oklahoma and Texas is? It's a pickup truck. And in Oklahoma, you'll be going down the highway and you'll swear that there's one person in that pickup truck ahead of you, but you know they have bench seats, many of them. And then when you get close, you realize, you know what, there's two people there. They're just right next to each other, and they look like one. They're just almost on top of each other. These are people in that first 3.5 years of their romantic relationship. But almost invariably, after 4 years of that romantic relationship, you go down the highway and it's very clear that there's two people in that pickup truck. There's a bench seat, but there's one on one side and there's one on the other. And there's not this affection and tenderness and those type of things that were so common earlier in the relationship. And this is also because it's very natural to overdo it in a marriage relationship. You know, you both love each other, you're getting undressed together, you're going to bed together, and so the encouragement to frequently do it is there. And so many couples have no clue where this is heading, but they do realize that their honeymoon stage may not last forever, but they don't recognize that one of the primary reasons it didn't last forever is because they weren't utilizing self-control in the marriage relationship, or they didn't know about this information, and they could have stayed in that euphoric stage all along. And so sexual satiation actually drives mates apart. When scientists looked into the brains of mating rats, they discovered that dopamine, the I gotta have it substance, was behind the phenomena of mate fatigue. As a rat copulates repeatedly with the same partner, less and less dopamine is released in the reward circuitry of its brain, yet when a novel potential mate showed up, dopamine surged again. And so it's back to this sexual satiation drives mates apart, but it happens with food too. It's the same mechanism that causes you to say yes to a sugary, fat-laden dessert, even when you're full of turkey or tofu or mashed potatoes. So you're filled up, you're saying, it was a good meal, and then this tantalizing novel dessert gets put in front of you, and your limbic system overrides it, and the frontal lobe gets overpowered by the limbic system. Dopamine surging in your reward circuitry can override your feelings of satiety, regardless of what your rational brain may think about overeating or infidelity. So the researchers have asked, are we all doomed by this? And the answer is absolutely not. There is a way out of this and a very excellent option to consider. When dopamine levels aren't bouncing around with intense highs and lows, more subtle pleasures can register as surprisingly enjoyable, and partners tend to retain their sparkle. By the way, regarding effects of pornography, the bottom line is synthetic stimulation can make your mate look like cold oatmeal. According to a 2007 study, mere exposures to a series of images of sexy females causes a man to do what to his real-life partner? Devalue her. He rates her lower not only on attractiveness, but also on warmth and intelligence. This is why our young people need to be aware of these things. They think, I've got to be able to be satisfied, and, I don't have a relationship, and this is the way of doing this. And so pornography and masturbation go hand in hand. But in reality, what they are doing is devaluing their future real-life partner, and they're going to actually believe that they're not as attractive, not as warm and intelligent, and it's going to be a major drain on a marriage relationship. Also, after a pornography consumption study in 1988, that was the one I mentioned last night, less satisfaction with your intimate partner if you have one, including the partner's affection, appearance, sexual curiosity, and performance. So there is a site. It's a scientific, secular site. And I'll tell you, it's the part that it's not so scientific on, although they believe they're scientific, is evolution, because they try to explain a lot of this through evolution. But whether you believe in creation or evolution, it turns out that the science behind the neurochemicals is exactly the same. And so, but this site on Your Brain on Porn, even though it's not religious at all, is a site that shows you what happens to your brain chemistry with porn, masturbation, and orgasm. So if you have any doubts about what I'm saying, I can tell you there's at least 30 studies from everything that I've mentioned confirming what I have just stated. This is not something that is, quasi-science or questionable science. It is solid science. And on this site, there is a recommendation for a 90-day reboot if you have been overdoing it. If you're showing any of those signs, dopamine levels low, any of the signs that I've talked about, it is a wonderful option to consider of going through what's called a 90-day sex fast or a 90-day reboot. That means no pornography, masturbation, no orgasm. If you've been having excessive sex, even in a marriage relationship, or if you're not married, if you've been masturbating at all, or those sorts of things, for 90 days to get your brain and hormonal system to stabilize. It takes more than a week. We talked about a week being kind of optimal in between times in a marriage relationship by design. By the way, the couples that have done this, and we've had many go through our program, they are amazed what happens after 90 days. After 90 days, they don't have to wait 90 days the next time. It's more like a week, but they talk about how the entire experience is wonderful, and also in between times how much better their relationship is, their affection for each other, the tenderness and genuine love for each other, how it becomes natural as a result. On the site, you can see a lot of people quoting. This is an individual who's trying to do the 90-day reboot. There's a lot of people there's a kind of a blog on there that you can actually respond to if you're trying to go through the 90 days. And this is a guy who didn't quite make it the 90 days, but he was getting close, and he said, masturbated 5 times today, and all the old depressive feelings came back. I could clearly see that depression was not because I felt bad about relapsing, because I didn't. Yeah, he's not a religious person or anything like that. I didn't feel bad about it. I didn't think it was wrong, but it was all about my brain. It got depressed, paranoid, and very anxious. How long after the binge? 30 minutes. I finally understand it now, not just in the abstract, but as a matter of experience. I recognize the feelings that often made me depressed, and what else? Socially awkward. By the way, social awkwardness is also at an all-time high, in part due to this. Another reason for it is social media. Social media has made us antisocial. When you're on a social media platform, you're not having a real live social interaction. And the less real live social interactions you have, the more socially awkward you are. But my solution, he says, so in other words, the solution for his depression before was masturbating, but my solution was all the time the problem. I never suspected masturbating had this big an impact on my whole life. And you might say, well, this is on the extreme part, 5 times a day. I can tell you there's many of our young people, they come to our program, they're doing it 7 times a day. They're all sorts of excessive aspects of things. And even the ones that are doing it once a week have adverse changes, particularly if it's the masturbation side of things and not having sex according to design. And of course, what happens is they have to use different techniques in order to try to reach that orgasm because the sensitivity goes down, all sorts of things, and this is why they start searching for these adult sex toys and all of this stuff, because the natural way can't do it anymore, and they're just into this pursuit of orgasm, and all of these adverse brain changes are occurring. So I had one of our researchers get on this site. Michael Hitt, who works for us, did this. And there are thousands of people on this site who have done the 90-day reboot. And when I said, look at what they're saying. And when they're saying at least several hundred of them are saying the same thing, I want you to write it down, as this is a possible benefit. Since hundreds of people are experiencing this benefit after the 90 days, let's put it down as far as the positive changes and eliminating what we call PMO. I'll tell you in our sheet, since we want this to be more private, most people don't know what PMO is. I'll tell people if they're into this during their 20 weeks, because they're with us for 10 days, but they're doing a 20-week program, that they would have to go through a 90-day reboot of no PMO, which is going at least 90 days and a 90-day reboot. So perspective on life, they would feel more alive than ever. Increased happiness, pride, joy, confidence, calmness. Happiness is found in simpler things. Just taking a nice walk produces a nice dopamine high in these individuals after the reboot. A nice meal, beautiful music produces this. And you know, it's sad to see our young people go to places that are beautiful and take a walk, and you realize it's done nothing for them. You know, it's like they realize some people get benefit from seeing beautiful flowers, but for them, maybe it's nice or whatever, but they're realizing they're not getting nice dopamine levels that are very healthy in regards to that, like people like myself and others can get very easily with just simple pleasures in life. They're experiencing more emotions. They feel less numb to life. They begin to love and accept themselves. They're able to take a stand for what's right. They don't back down. They're able to state their opinion. And notice this, an increased hope occurs. Why is that hope occurring? Their frontal lobe is improving. You have to have that frontal lobe in order to have that hope. A better future always seems obtainable, they'll say, no matter how difficult things get, because their frontal lobe is intact. Social interactions. This is on the man side of things. We'll talk about the female here in a little bit. Less social anxiety and fear of judgment. They're able to initiate conversation more often. Increased conversational skills, eye contact and smiling. Vocabulary goes up significantly. Words come to them more easily, and they feel more in touch with other people and their emotions. They're more focused on interaction with people. Real women look more attractive, the men will say, after going through this 90-day reboot. More attention to interaction and physical touch than the visual. Increased motivation to meet and talk to women. Creation of magnetic aura and energy that attracts more attention from women, both known and unknown. They feel less intimidated in the presence of an attractive woman, and if they are married, once the 90 days is completed, their sex life gets dramatically better. They enjoy every aspect of it, and it no longer is just a pursuit of orgasm, which it had deteriorated into beforehand. By the way, looking at those other bullet points on there have been some societal shifts that have been major. In fact, Dr. Baumeister and others talk about this from Stanford. But I don't know if you've noticed what has happened to marriage in young people. Is it more common today or less common? It's significantly less common. Even in places like, I know when I was growing up and I was in college at Andrews University for my pre-med times, it was well known that colleges were this tremendous dating ground, and the one that had the greatest reputation at the time I was going to college was called SMC, which stood for Southern Matrimonial College, because everybody dated there at Southern, and marriages were occurring all the time and those sorts of things. But the other day, there was a medical student who was rotating with me who had gone to Southern, beautiful girl, great personality, and she's a senior medical student, and she's up there at Weimar. As mentioned, I'm an adjunct professor at Loma Linda, and so I do some of the clinical medicine things for those that want electives there. And she was doing a great job in the rotation. And after I got to know her some, I said, so, any boyfriends or things like that? And she says, no. And I said, well, that has to be by choice, right? And she says, Dr. Nedley, things are different than when my parents went to college and when your parents went to college. She says, I've been told I have no body odor. I've been told that I'm not someone who's really awkward or whatever, but I was never asked out for a date one time at Southern. And I've been at Loma Linda 4 years and never been asked out for a date. She said, I'd love to be able to get married to the right person, but things are a lot different. Why is it different? Because before, this libido stage and this lower brain stage was really keyed up, but because there is such massive pornography consumption and masturbation, even among our own young people, the desire to actually go out and have a real life relationship is at an all-time low. And this is why Dr. Baumeister and others say 1 out of 3 people in their teens will never get married. 1 out of 3 in the nation itself. And then marriage, because this is often part of the marriage aspect of things in the history, the marriages are pretty messed up as a result. But notice, after just 90 days of quitting, now all of a sudden they have a motivation to actually meet a real woman. They have a motivation to actually go out and pursue, and they have interest, and women are looking more attractive and those sorts of things. Physically and mentally, what happens? Increased determination, energy, and productivity. Reading, writing, drawing, working out. Increased quality of sleep occurs. Physically, better posture and appearance. Clearer skin, less acne. Increased athletic performance, stamina, and physical strength. And you will see this across the board in those that abstain. Their physical attributes in being able to develop in sport goes much higher. And you can see some of this in regards to what's happened when they begin to stray. Tiger Woods was up there at the very top until he started going into this novelty aspect of things, overdoing it and all this, and then he couldn't win a tournament for years, no matter how much he tried. And, he did get a little lucky here in the last year, but it's very clear that the old Tiger Woods is not back yet. He really needs our program. He needs to know about this aspect of things. Deeper, more manly voice in men will occur as well. The testosterone levels are higher. Increased clarity of mind, loss of brain fog, increased concentration and focus. Grades get better. Better decision making, both short-term and long-term. Memory goes up. Less mood swings. These are quotes from those who have completed a 90-day reboot. I love interacting with real people now. My mental focus is incredible, allowing me to start doing what? Overachieving at work. Now, of course, this produces a little difficulty. He said it's being noticed. In other words, everyone is saying, you are working circles around us. You're getting so much done. You're creative. Your energy level is so high. What has happened to you? And he can't say, I quit masturbating 90 days ago. My confidence seems indestructible, composure unflappable, creativity flows out of me. It feels like my motivation to do things is more grounded in bigger picture type of thinking rather than going what feels good in the moment. Why is it bigger picture type of thinking? Their frontal lobe is back. I don't want to have sex with every girl. I do want a connection now. I have no interest in non-productive things like playing video games or being online all day for no reason. By the way, there's a tremendous connection between the video gamers and this. They'll video game primarily, but they take breaks with pornography and masturbation. And then they'll, for years, get involved in this totally non-productive activity. Their parents, everybody's worried about them. But in reality, when they come to our program and they realize and they give up this PMO, within 90 days, they don't even want to play a video game. It's like, how in the world did I used to want to do these non-productive things? I'm no longer an angry person. I'm no longer looking at women and wondering what they look like naked and what they're like in bed. Why is that the case? Well, they're not doing the pornography. Freedom, I got my life back. I'm no longer a slave to my addiction, and I can easily take on complex mathematical or engineering problems. A little bit of advice, says this guy who's going through the 90 days. The best thing I did for myself during these 90 days was to be what? Fill their life so that they're not in this idle time going into this. What about females viewing pornography? By the way, female pornography consumption is at an all-time high. It used to be rare. Well over 50% of young females are also involved in the masturbation and pornography aspect of things. And the same adverse brain changes take place in them that is in men. And in fact, in many cases, it's even more profound. Frequency of masturbation and non-ethical extramarital sex in females is related to internet pornography at an early age. So the pornography is just as dangerous for the females. Women exposed more frequently or longer to internet porn were associated significantly with an increase in masturbation and extramarital sexual activities. Sexual addiction was high, and more frequent and longer exposure to internet pornography showed a 5.3 increase in terms of development of sexual addiction, as well as all sorts of sexual problems that result. The prevalence of female sexual dysfunction also high in those that masturbate. And it's just as difficult for them to give it up. Here's one female going through the 90-day reboot who had finally been successful doing it. I have to say that sex addiction withdrawal is much more difficult than the cannabis, cigarette, alcohol, amphetamine, and ecstasy withdrawals I've gone through. I've been a heavy consumer and addict of all these substances and stopped them all at the same time 4.5 years ago. But what did she find more difficult? This 90-day reboot. And this is why you have to be busy. And we just give them a 2-word instruction, hands off, as well, and working through it. But once they've stopped masturbating and stopped the sexual excess, there's much more glow related to their partner responding to touch. If married, they're able to orgasm now with their partner, where before it was very difficult in the natural act. Renewal of clitoral sensitivity comes back dramatically. Weight loss becomes easier. Desire to be with their partner again. More energy and more motivation. More sexual pleasure and emotional responsiveness. Their mood gets better. Their ability to manage their emotions gets better. Increased self-discipline, effectiveness, and motivation, and improved well-being and fitness. And they notice when they quit, men start noticing them much more readily as well. There's an aura that occurs in individuals that aren't involved in this that actually make them more attractive, and they're able to make new friends easily, and the depression also goes away. Song of Solomon says this, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. 3 times Song of Solomon says this, and what is he saying? This is talking about even in a loving relationship, a marriage relationship. How do daughters of Jerusalem stir up or awaken love? It's actually by the way they're dressing or not dressing and those sorts of things. But what he is saying is, don't get into the provocative attire until it's time. And of course, that would be with the person that you actually love. And then he says this, let your fountain of human life be blessed with the rewards of fidelity and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant doe, tender, gentle, attractive. Let her bosom satisfy you at all times and always be transported, enraptured, and captivated with delight in her love. And I can tell you, those that follow this pattern, they will be rejoicing in the wife of their youth decades later and still have that euphoria stage of marriage that's there. And I can tell you the euphoria actually grows. This is what a lot of people don't realize. You know, I could tell you about our Erica and my story, but we've kind of run out of time. But when I was learning about these things a number of years ago, I asked her where we were in those stages of marriage, on those 4 stages. And she says, we've never gone out of the first stage. Are we going to get to these other stages? I sure hope not. But one of the reasons why is because of putting together the knowledge here, and of course the spirit of prophecy gave us an advantage as well. If you want to see what inspiration says about this, look up in Ellen White's Sexual Excess. And you will see all of the things that science mentioned. And she talks about it even in a marriage relationships. There is sexual excess. And she says it will result in all of these things, and she goes into significant detail. And she even says, if you doubt this in the judgment, you won't doubt it at all, because you will see this as clearly as the day is long. And so, but we can be always transported and raptured. And in Erica and my sake, I can tell you the love and the attraction I have for her now supersedes what it was when we got married. It actually is better than it is at 10 years. And I keep saying, you know, eventually it's going to have to decline, I would think. You know, we've been married for getting close to 40 years now. And it just continues to improve in all aspects. So if you're not married, how often? No sex is best. There's no problems with no sex, by the way. Some people think, oh, how am I going to empty your prostate? Well, it's called the wet dream. There was something the Lord created in men, and by the way, that's a sign that you're rebooting. If you stop sexual activity and you have a wet dream, that's a sign that the brain is starting to reboot. A lot of men have never had a wet dream because they've been involved in this masturbation from an early age and that sort of thing. And so there's no issues with having zero sex. It's actually healthy for you if you're not in a marriage relationship. There is issue of having zero sex if you are in a marriage relationship. But no masturbation or sexual stimulation. As a general rule, more than once a week will decrease testosterone levels and set up sexual excess, and its resulting 3 major effects will occur. I don't recommend normally going longer than 2 weeks in withholding yourself. And so how much, what we'd say, certainly not before that 4-day period. There might be special occasions where it's 4 days or something like that, but not before that 4-day period, and a week might be better. So I normally say somewhere between 1 and 7 or 8 times a month. But if you don't have it, these myths about sex, if you don't have it, you'll be less healthy. That's false. Gazing at provocatively clothed women or men as long as their goods are covered is harmless. That's false. Pornography is no big deal and is likely harmless. Absolutely false. This idea, be healthy, be a stud, have it as often as you can, as long as it's consensual. The more sex, the better. Very false. Masturbation is healthy, at least in some circumstances. Never. And this idea that a man's libido is greater than a woman's, even in the healthiest of situations, that's also false. What you will notice after this reboot, and if you're doing it only once a week, the woman is actually prodding the man, you know. Tomorrow is going to be 7 days, and they're looking forward to it just as much as the man is. And so I recommend this, I think is the last slide, decision time. No sexual stimulation outside of the marriage relationship. Watch out for the internet. No masturbation. Get rid of the triggers, the TV, movies, magazines, sports, which has the lovely lady of the day. And less is best, goal of 2 to 7 times a month in a marriage relationship. And I can tell you there's no downside to this decision. A lot of people on this end of it are going to think, boy, this is going to have some downsides. No, you go through this. There's no downside to this decision. only an upside. And once you have self-control in this area of your life, in a marriage relationship, you are going to have self-control over lust and appetite outside of the marriage relationship. And so the temptations that used to be there in the workplace and those things are just going to go away, because whenever you think about romance and sex, you're only going to be thinking about your marriage partner and looking forward to that next time with them. Well, I hope this is helpful, and this is why God gave us instruction in this area. As we do it God's way, He will bless us with a more abundant life.